Hey Latchkey kids, got your hot cocoa? Because we're going to be talking about the Christmas horror story. I should say, have you got your eggnog with the scotch in it? Or Hennessy? Or cognac? Let's get right to it. The opening score of this is so epic. And of course this takes place on Christmas Eve. Immediately we are treated to a beautifully rendered aerial shot of Santa's castle in the North Pole. And this is what will serve as our wraparound story. Then it cuts to 12 hours earlier with William Shatner being an on-air personality in a sleepy little town. From there, we're treated to our first story about a group of teens that are going to try to investigate some murders in the basement of a school. From there, it transitions again to story 2 as one of the teens leaves with her family on a trip. And as the family drives by, it transitions into story number 3 that has a family that's going into the woods to cut down a Christmas tree. I think one of the most creative things about this movie is how the stories weave in and out of each other. I like that aspect of the movie. In this, all the stories are kind of happening concurrently, and I really appreciate that. Another thing that I appreciate about this movie is that even though there are multiple directors, they feel evenly matched. A lot of anthology films have this issue of having evenly matched directors. You'll have VHS is a perfect example of this, where I would say, and this is just my opinion, 60% of VHS is garbage, and then 40% are actually really good. And it just kind of sucks if it just kind of sucks that it feels like the directing levels are not evenly matched. One of the best anthology films of our time, Creepshow, benefited from having all parts of it directed by the same director and all parts of it written by the same writer. That is definitely a advantage. So for this to feel as though it's all written by one person, all directed by one person, is really, really striking, because that's hard to do. That's hard to meld things together in that way. Another thing I really liked is how far this movie went with things. It was not afraid to go there. The cursing, the violence, the sexual overtones all pushed the envelope. There's only one segment that kind of bugged me, and that was the family that went out to the woods to get the Christmas tree. The segment itself, the story was really good. It's just the mother that she really irritated me, some of the choices she was making. But I guess she had to make those choices for the story to progress. But she was so aggravating. Certain things didn't make sense. Like when her son, will say, assaulted his father at the dinner table, and she was just like, don't punish him. And then just asked him, well, why would you do that? I don't know any mother that would be like that. I know some fathers that are like that with their daughters, where they can, like, my 2 baby sisters could get away with murder. Like, either one of them could accidentally, well, no, either one of my baby sisters could shoot me in the leg, and I can come in the house and my father would be like, well, I'm sure she didn't mean it. I think both of my baby sisters probably know they have this power over my dad, but they don't have this power over their mother. But then, like, sometimes dads and mothers can punish so differently. Like, my mother's the type to just snatch your ass up and whoop it. My father would give you, peel all these onions and put them in a jar, copy 2 pages out of the dictionary, write, I will not hit my sister 150 times. When I was like 5 and under, I think, stand in the corner and think about what you've done, which is basically, a form of timeout. As I got older, I almost kind of appreciated my mother's punishment better, because at least when you get an ass whooping, that's over with in a few minutes. You get whooped, it's done. Go cry yourself to sleep. You'll be all right the next day. But it takes a lot of time out of your day to copy pages out of dictionary. Your hands get cramped up. In the onion thing, chopping up onions and putting them in a jar. I don't know what kind of old school punishment that is. Anyways, I digress. That mother should whip that little boy's behind, but, it was in the script. Oh, I almost forgot about the lectures. Oh my God. I don't know who was worse, my father or my grandfather, with, I'm going to lecture you for 2 hours and 45 minutes. Like, and you're just like, I get it. I know what I did wrong. And I'm still going to talk to you for another 45 minutes. And it's like, just send my mother in here to smack the shit out of me so I can just be over with it. Anyway, suffice to say, that mother was bugging. The acting in all these stories is really great. Even though I didn't like the choices that the mother was making, she was a good actress. I will not take that away from her. Shatner was also extremely entertaining, as he always is. And I loved how his character got progressively drunker as the story went on. As I said at the beginning, the score is perfection. The effects were on point. They did a mixture of practical and CGI, and both looked pretty good. None of it was weak. All of this was really well done. If I'm not mistaken, this was released direct to video, and it is so much better than a lot of movies that were released into theaters. This has become a common thing in the last 2 years, I would say, of a lot of really great direct to video horror being released. And that's why I get so irritated when people say, oh, there hasn't been any good horror movies this year. Speaking about a particular fashion magazine, which we won't name because fuck them. There's a lot of great horror being released. It's not always released to the movie theater. The reveal at the end is pretty cool. I actually forgot about it. Even though I had seen this movie before, I was so engrossed in what was happening in that particular scene. Again, when the reveal happens, you're like, oh yeah, that is a thing that happened. But, I mean, you'll know what I mean when you see it. I don't want to spoil it. But something happens that changes the context of everything. Also, the way that reveal is shot is great, the way it cuts between the two scenarios. As you can tell, I highly recommend this movie. It is a modern day classic. Please let me know what you think about A Christmas Horror Story in the comments, and I'll be right back to talk to you about And All the Creatures Were Stirring. Hey guys, this is a movie that actually snuck up on me. I just happened to notice that it dropped on Shudder, so I decided to add it to this series. This movie opens with the awkwardest couple ever meeting for a theater date. As a side note, the actress is a dead ringer for Paola from 90 Day Fiancé. They go to the theater and there's this really super weird box office attendant and also a weird usher, which at first I thought were the same person, but eventually I guess they're not. The feel of this movie really reminds me of Twin Peaks, especially when this character that looks like they came from Whoville comes out and places the title card for each sequence in this anthology. The first segment is called The Stockings Were Hung, and it's about an office party that goes downhill really fast. The people are having this office party and they get kind of accosted by a person who is kind of like if you cross the Joker with Jigsaw. Speaking of actresses who look like other people, there's a young actress in this that is a dead ringer for Margot Kidder. Anyhow, I won't tell you what happens in this sequence because it would be all spoilers, but I really enjoyed the story. I kind of like how it played out, and it was short and to the point. I hate when sometimes some anthologies, VHS, I'm looking at you, drag out stories that don't need to be any longer than a few minutes. Don't try to push something to 15 minutes when you only have 4 minutes of content. Second story is called Dash All the Way. And this one is super interesting. It is about a Christmas shopper who is on his way home. He's going from the parking lot to his car and accidentally locks his keys in the car. And he runs into what looked to be a couple hippie chicks in a van that help him out momentarily before kind of setting him up to deal with a supernatural being. That's the best way I can put it without I don't know whether that's spoiling it or not. I hope I'm not telling you too much about that. Anyways, I like the lore that was introduced in this story, and this was another one that the pacing was well done. I thought it was about as good as the first story, so that held up well. Story 3 is called All Through the House. In this story, we meet this sad sack who really doesn't care about Christmas, so much so that he vandalizes one of his neighbor's Christmas decorations, and I feel like we're meant to see him as a new version of Ebenezer Scrooge. This one, while the story was a little bit interesting, I didn't really care for it as much as the first two entries into this anthology. Story 4 is called A Rose Such a Clatter. This one is probably my least favorite, even though as a gore connoisseur you would think that I would like this one the most. It just didn't hit with me. It's about a guy who hits a deer on his way home and then gets revenge on him. Story 5 is called I'm recording! You're probably going to hear talking in the background, even though I've asked people to stop screaming in the living room because I'm recording. They don't care. They don't care what I'm doing. No one respects me. I have no friends. Story 5 is called In a Twinkling. we meet Steve, who just wants to be alone on Christmas Eve for what I thought was to keep himself from changing into a werewolf, but total misdirect. He's not a werewolf at all. Some other stuff happens. And the actress from Crazy Rich Asians was in this segment. I like her a lot. Oh, and she's also in Fresh Off the Boat. I like that show as well. Constance Wu, that's her name. She was in this segment. This was a pretty cool story. I like the Twilight Zone aspect of it, or Outer Limits. I think for a moment there, they even started playing a few bars from either, I don't know why I'm blanking on whether it's the Twilight Zone theme or the Outer Limits theme. Someone in the comments who's seen this anthology, please tell me if that music they were playing in this segment was from the Twilight Zone or the Outer Limits. Story 6 was called And To All a Good Night. This ties up the wraparound story of the theater date. I won't tell you what happened because it's also just one of those out of left field, weird David Lynchian type things. See, now I sound, when I say stuff like that, it reminds me of Kurt Kermode. Whenever you say something is Lynchian, or sometimes he'll use psychological terms like, oh, this was Jungian, or this was very Polanski-esque. It's just such a Kurt Kermode thing to say. But this movie was very David Lynchian. One other thing, I really liked the artwork that accompanied the ending credits. Those looked really nice, and they each related to some of the segments. Well, not some of each of the segments in this movie. So even though this was not as good, in my opinion, as A Christmas Horror Story, it still was a decent anthology. I think only really, I shouldn't say any of the stories were weak. I don't think any of the stories were weak. I just had a personal preference where some of them I liked better than others. But that's, everyone's like that. Even with how I mentioned Creepshow before, there's still people that, oh, they'll say, you know, my favorite is What's Eating You, or they'll say my favorite is Father's Day. You know, just everyone has their favorite segments of things. Even with VHS, I'm sure there's people. Oh my God, I can't. Why is this playing? When you're trying to make a video and Damas Live starts playing, I just lost my train of thought because as I was recording, a Damas Live video automatically started playing on my Roku TV. Don't know why. So I will just close this video out as I usually do. And that is, have you seen A Christmas Horror Story or And All the Creatures Were Stirring? What did you think about each of these? Do you have favorite segments in these? And of all of the horror anthologies that you have seen, what's your favorite segment? I would say for me, mine is definitely Father's Day and Creepshow, but a very strong second would be Thanks for the Ride and Creepshow 2. But like I always say, just because I love something doesn't mean you won't hate it, and just because I hate something doesn't mean you won't love it. Let me know in the comments what you think. Bye.